Sechas Nazir Daf Chaf takes us to the end of the third parak of the Masechta and begins the fourth parak of the Masechta. So of two Mishnayos, one, the last Mishnah, the third parak, and the first Mishnah, and the fourth. Until the first Mishnah, the Gemara is finishing its discussion of the last Mishnah, where we saw Machlokas Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. What happens if somebody makes a vow of Nazirus in Chutz La'aretz? Does he have to redo the entire Nazirus in Eretz Yisrael, or only 30 days? We'll get to the next Mishnah, which discusses if there's a problem with a dispute between witnesses as to how long the Nazirus was actually made. And then the fourth parak will begin talking about the halachas if somebody says a vow of Nazirus and someone else makes a vow by linking himself to that vow. How does that Nazirus work? So let's begin. In the last Mishnah we saw Machlokas from Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. If somebody makes a vow of Nazirus in Chutz La'aretz that is longer than 30 days and he keeps it in Chutz La'aretz, halachas when he gets back to Eretz Yisrael he has to do it over, because Chutz La'aretz is all Tamei D'Rabbanan. So according to Beis Shammai he only has to do over 30 days. According to Beis Hillel he has to do over the entire thing, no matter how long it is. Gemara brought a story with Heleni Hamalka, who did 7 years in Chutz La'aretz, and she came to Eretz Yisrael. Beis Hillel made her do 7 years all over again, and then she became Tamei, and she had to do another 7 years, so a total of 21 years. Rabbi Yehuda says no, the total was only 14 years. So now the Gemara asks, according to Rabbi Yehuda, what was the 14 years? Was it like Beis Shammai, and she had to do over only 30 days, but then she had to do over again because she became Tamei? So Rabbi Yehuda is arguing on Beis Hillel, saying she didn't have to do the second set of 7 all over again. Or is Rabbi Yehuda going like Beis Hillel, but he says, his version of the story, she never became Tamei, so she only had to do it over again because of Beis Hillel Shita. Meaning, Rabbi Yehuda says that she only had to do 7 years twice. Is that because of Tumah or because of Shitas Beis Hillel? So Gemara answers, it has to be because of Shitas Beis Hillel. It can't be because of Tumah. And the Gemara brings two reasons why. The Gemara says, first of all, if it was because of Tumah, so then what actually happens was that she came to Eretz Yisrael, she had to do over 30 days, and then she had to do over another 7 years because of Tumah. That's if it's because of Tumah, like Beis Shammai. If that's the case, then she didn't do 14 years, she did 14 years plus 30 days. Even Beis Shammai holds she has to do over 30 days. So she finished 7 years, she came and she did over 30 days, and then she did another 7 years because of Tumah. So obviously it's not because of Tumah. Obviously she did 7 years in Chutz La'aretz, and she did 7 years in Eretz Yisrael, and Rabbi Yehuda just holds she never became Tamei, so he didn't have anything to do. And that's like Shitas Beis Hillel. Now the Gemara goes further and proves another proof that it has to be Shitas Beis Hillel, because Rabbi Yehuda holds the name of Rabbi Eliezer. The Gemara brings a brisa that when somebody becomes Tamei, he does not have to do his entire Nazirus over again, he only has to do 30 days. If his Nazirus was longer than 30 days, he only has to do 30 days over again. If that's true, so then if what happened here was a Tumah, she wouldn't have to do 14 years. She would have to do, she did her first 7 years, then she did 30 years again because if she does Beis Shammai, and if she became Tamei again, she would do another 30 days. A total of 7 years and 60 days. But you wouldn't get to 14 years. So either way, we have two ways of showing that you wouldn't get to 14 years. The only way to get to 14 years is that she does Beis Hillel, and she became Tamei, and she does Beis Hillel, and she never became Tamei. She had to do the 7 years over again because she came from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael. Gemara now introduces the last Mishnah in the parak. We'll have the Mishnah, and then we'll have a brisa that has a slightly different version of the same machlokes, and the Gemara's discussion of expanding it. So the Mishnah says, if there are two sets of Eidim, two in each set, disputing how many consecutive Nazirusin a person was makabel. One set says 2, and the other set says 5. So what's the halacha? So Beis Shammai says the Eidim contradict each other. One says 2, one says 5, they're arguing. They cancel each other out, and therefore there's no testimony. He doesn't have to keep anything. Beis Hillel says no, they both agree that he made vows for 2 Nazirusin. They argue over whether there was an additional 3. So on what they agree, you do have Eidos, and therefore he has to keep 2 at least. Okay, that's a Mishnah. Then Mara quotes a brisa where Rabbi Shmuel says, no. In the case where it's 2 sets of Eidim, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree, there's no problem. They agree on 2, so they keep 2 sets of Eidos. And the reason is because even if one of them is lying, one of these sets is lying, it doesn't matter. The other one is telling the truth, and the other one is saying that there's two Nazirusin, at least. Maybe more, but at least 2. And therefore he has to keep the two. The case where Beis Hillel and Shammai are arguing is where there's one set of Eidim comprised of two total Eidim, and these two are arguing. One says 2 sets of Naziris, and one says 5 sets of Naziris. Now, since one of them is lying, you don't have 2 Eidim, you only have 1 Eid. So, Beis Shammai says you don't have any Eidus, and therefore he doesn't have to keep anything. Beis Hillel says no, the one who says 5 is also testifying to 2, and therefore both of them are testifying, even if one of them is lying whether there was an additional 3 or not, they're both agreeing that there was 2, and therefore you do have, that there was at least 2, and therefore you do have testimony to 2, and it has to keep those 2. So that's Rabbi Shmuel's version of this machlekes. Now the Gemara says that Rav expands this a little. Rav commented on this, and he said that there's something called moineh. Moineh is where he counts it out. So Rav says that Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai both agree that the witnesses count out the years. They are definitely contradictory, and you don't have any set of Eidos. Even Beis Hillel agrees to that. The only case where Beis Hillel says you do have 2 years at least is where they didn't count it out. So Gemara says, what does count it out means? What is that? So Gemara quotes Rav Chama, who said to Rav Chizda. Few possibilities as to what he may have meant, and Rav Chama is not going to like any of them. One possibility is that the first one said 2 and not 5, and the second one said 5 and not 2. So there, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree. Says Rav Chama, that cannot be what Rav meant, because that's pashut. They're clearly contradicting each other, and therefore that's not the pshat. So what then is the pshat? So Rav Chama says it must be that the first one says 1 and 2. He made 1 Naziris and then another Naziris, and the second it says 3, 4, 5. So now Rav is being mechadesh. One says 1 and 2, he means 1 and 2 dafka, not 3, 4, 5, and one says 3, 4, 5 is saying 5 dafka and not 2. And that's what they mean by saying it that way, and therefore I was telling me that this is considered contradictory, and even Beis Hillel agrees. So Rav Chama asks, why is that contradictory? Why don't you just view the one who said 3, 4, 5 as following on, continuing up where the first aid left off? The first aid says 1, 2, and the second one said 3, 4, 5. He means to say, yeah, that 1, 2 that he mentioned, plus another 3, 4, 5. And therefore everyone is agreeing to the first 2 at least. So therefore, Rav Chama doesn't like Rav's pshat, and the Gemara says that in Marav and Eretz Yisrael, they said, yeah, that's true, they also agree. Even by Moineh, Beis Hillel would say his shita, that there is at least Eidos to 2 sets of Nazirs, and he does have to keep those 2. This concludes the 3rd parak of the Masechta. Now we begin the 4th. The first Mishnah in the 4th parak discusses somebody who makes a vow of Naziris, and other people want to add on to it, as well as if a man's adding on to his wife's Naziris, or her adding on to his Naziris, makes a qualified Naziris, or can he still be made for it? So where's the first case where somebody says Harini Nazir, and his friend says Va'ani. First one says I am a Nazir, and his friend says me too. And then there's even a third one who says and me too. Va'ani, and me. So the halacha is that is a valid vow of Naziris. By linking himself to the first one, the second one made himself a Nazir, and by linking himself to the second one, the third one made himself a Nazir, and they're all chayav Naziris. Now, if the first person is matir his neder Naziris, he's no longer a Nazir, and he uprooted it milachatchila, that he never was one, the other 2 are also cancelled, because they made their Naziris like his, and his is gone, so theirs is also gone. If however the last one uproots his, only his is uprooted, only his has a heter, but the other ones still count, because they weren't dependent on him. Next case, somebody says, I am a Nazir, and his friend says, my mouth is like his mouth, or my hair is like his hair. That's a valid language of taking a vow of Naziris. Next case, somebody says, I am a Nazir, and his wife says, and me. So that's a valid Naziris, but the husband could be made for it if he wants to, because he's made for, she has a separate vow of Naziris from his, but dependent on his, and he could be made for that. If he's made for it, her vow is off, but his Naziris still exists. Next, if she says, I am a Nazir, and her husband says, and me, so now he can't be made for it, because by saying and me, he was already mekayim it. Next case is if he says to her, I am a Nazir, what about you? And she says, Amen, meaning to say yes. So she took a vow of Naziris based on his, and again, he could be made for it if he wants. And if he does, his own vow stays. If, however, she says, I am a Nazira, and you, what about you? And he says, Amen, again, so he was masking to her Naziris, he can't take that off anymore. Alright, now the Gemara begins. The Gemara brings the machlokes between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya as to how fast does the person who says va'ani have to say it right after the original one said Harini Nazir? So the Gemara says that Rish Lakish was sitting in front of Rabbi Yehuda and Asiya, and they were sitting in the Beis Medrash, and they were saying as follows. Rish Lakish said that it has to be betoich kidei dibor, which is defined as the time it takes to say Shalom Aleichem, which is it's the time it takes to give Shalom, or to ask Shalom, which the Gemara says is the length of time it takes to say the words Shalom Alecha Rebbe, the time it takes the Talmud to ask his Rebbe Shalom. That's Rish Lakish's opinion. If he says Va'ani after that, it doesn't count, because he's not fast enough to link to the original Naziris. And Rabbi Yehuda Nazir disagrees. He says, Lefi you, a Talmud who's saying Shalom to his Rebbe can't be Makabel Naziris from a Nazir who's walking by, because by the time he finishes saying Shalom Alecha Rebbe, it's too late. So he doesn't agree with that, and he says it's not Mastaber that that's true. So you should be able to say it for a while afterwards, maybe the immediate time after, but not for a long time, but at least longer than just the time it takes to say Shalom Alecha Rebbe. So where it says the Brisa that clearly supports Rish Lakish, the Brisa says if somebody says Harini Nazir, and his friend hears, and he waits Kidei Dibor, and then he says Va'ani, the first one's a Nazir and the second one is not. And how long is Kidei Dibor? The time it takes for a Talmud to ask Shalom Aleichem from his Rebbe. The Gemara will continue discussing this machlokes further into the next daf.